let's jump in here. Though we be few, we be many, because this is actually going out to all the mentors. We can send them a link to this. And so,
Great.
oh, just super thankful for you taking the time.
Yeah,
I'm really excited. Yeah, on just on behalf of third year to hear this message. Part of really half of what we do, one half is to the students, but really one half is to mentors. And Melissa and I have been dreaming and scheming about what that is going to look like in the coming weeks and months and years. But we just believe that we're on the edge of a mentor movement. That just we have a spiritual inheritance from Bill Johnson to be people who raise up big people. So, Paul, thank you so much for sharing this. This is a part of like this big vision of raising up mentors. So we're excited, and in true Zoom fashion, let's just give Paul a wave of thanks. Take
yeah,
it away,
thanks.
Paul.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably going to be fairly informal. I'll avoid the standing up and waving my finger at you and preaching. But so I just scribbled up behind me. And I guess the reality is that I am one that left and got sent out. And so there's a number of things that I think we've definitely learned. Sue and I have learned along the way and continue to learn. And so I just wrote those, well, four things and put culture in the middle. I thought I'd just chat around those for a moment because for me to speak to mentors, it's about you helping people to leave, and it's probably one of the big challenges I think of the school. Always has been. I think it's a unique challenge because the school's unique. The unique nature of the school is that there isn't really an entry requirement in terms of qualifications, and there isn't an external destiny. You go to medical school, you pass your MCAT, and you leave to be a doctor. So and we don't have a church planting model or a mission based model. So and I'm not saying any of that from a negative point of view. I'm just saying it from the point of view of that is our reality in our world. So in no particular order, life after Bethel, which and it's obviously going to vary because the people that you are mentoring, some of them are American, but some 45%, I think, still of the school is international. So that's a huge chunk of people. So the first thing I've put up there is home, and I think my approach to all of this would be that these are good things for you to be aware of and to have conversations around. Now, this is my belief. I believe that Bethel gives us a home. Now, for some that home is 1 year, 3 years, or some of us 15, and others forever. Um, and there's no question about it that there is an element of that is obviously very much physical. And actually, it was my Sue was given the prophetic word in 2000 that Bethel would be her home. Little did she know that that would be true, that Bethel probably was more our home than Reading. I wouldn't particularly say that Reading became our home, but I would say that Bethel became our home. So the challenge is that the desire is that everyone wants Bethel to be their permanent home, and nobody wants to leave the home of Bethel. Those kind of elements that are in there. But the way I describe it is that Bethel gave me a home, and that home is an address in my heart. It's an address in my heart of affection, of shared covering, of shared vision. It's something that goes on the inside of me. And here's how I believe I now approach this, because the problem is you won't find another Bethel. You're not gonna, if Bethel is your tribe, it's your tribe. And there's not really any getting away from it. And I don't think that you're going to find another one. Now, you might find a Jesus culture or a Bethel Austin, maybe that will be, but even then, I suspect there will be elements. But here's what I know is the home that's in my heart enables me to tap in to the parts of that home that I recognize everywhere I go. And that for me is the only way to do this, because if I'm looking for the whole bag, it will fail me. It will fail me. So a lot of what I think is that we're setting students up to win, to succeed, not to fail, which means you got to look for it. Because I mean, the absolute reality, and Sue was sitting here, we'd be sharing a lot of this together because it's been our joint experience, that there are just very few places where the worship even scratches close to Bethel. It's not. It just is a reality, and even you can sometimes go to places where there's incredible worship, but if Bethel's your tribe, that unique experience is hard to find anywhere else. So what do? You have to tap in to that which is inside of you, that kind of recognition. So I would say to set people up to succeed is, you're not going to find this again, but if it becomes inside you, you can take it everywhere you go, and you can. So I mean, I've found myself now, I'm at one church tell me I'm on their worship team. I mean, for a man that can't sing, that's crazy. But it's because I'm just trying to teach them to steward the presence of God, and just to help them to do that. So my lens is, I'm looking, and it's Bethel. It's our stuff. It's why culture's in the middle. Is I'm looking for what's right, not what's wrong. And so the home that's in my heart is looking for pieces of that everywhere I go, where I can go, oh, that's home. That's how we do things at home. The joke way of saying it, using the American phrase is it's, there's nothing like, mum's apple pie. You're not going to get mum's apple pie anywhere else. You're just not. You're not going to get the full thing. But if you have the eyes to see it, you will see everywhere you go, those moments, those glimpses. And I mean, I was in a meeting recently, and and it was honestly, it was hugely disappointing. It just was hugely disappointing, and I had to turn off my kind of leader switch and think, it's not my meeting, and I just have to look for what's right, what I can connect to, and not walk out frustrated. And I actually didn't share for 24 hours with Sue how I felt, because it's like, I don't want to be the one that leaves that and goes, so firstly, I would say that Bethel gives us home. It's an address on the inside. It's an address in our hearts, and it enables us to tap into what's right and what God is doing everywhere we go. So and then, I've put in the middle there culture, and a very strange experience, and I'll tap into culture in loads of places, but quite a strange experience happened to me that it actually genuinely surprised me. And intellectually at first, I didn't think it was right. But when I first came home, um, I bought a book called The Culture Code by somebody called Erin Myers, I think their name is. And probably typical of me, the first 4 chapters are great. The rest of it I could have lived without, so probably didn't read most of the rest. But the first 4 chapters were great. But there was a line in there, and it said, you don't understand cultural difference until you've lived somewhere where you're born, gone somewhere, and then gone back. Like, because the comparison doesn't exist until you've gone back. And intellectually, I thought, that's rubbish. I knew what the differences were culturally between, America and the UK when I was there. But honestly, since I've come back, I'm left thinking, no, I didn't. I didn't get it. Now, here's an interesting application. This is free. The interesting application is, I think this is going to apply to post-COVID. I think we think in COVID that we know the difference, but I don't think we're going to know the difference until we come out and we actually reflect. So this awareness of the culture is, I think we really need to just to help people and say, look, when you go back, it's going to feel more of a contrast than you expected it to, and just to be prepared for that. And that actually links in, if I drop down bottom left there, that links into the narrative gap, because it's kind of like there's a culture gap that is going to be a bigger culture gap than you expected. None of this is negative. It's just the reality. And of course, if you know, I mean, obviously this last season with a lot of what's going on in America and et cetera, you become very aware of the culture gap. Um, but there's also this thing called a narrative gap. And I, I think just saying, hey, these are just some good things to point out. You're not going to find home like Bethel again, but if it's inside of you, you can find elements of it everywhere. The culture gap is going to be, there will be a real awareness of that. Um, and I certainly have become aware of some elements of that. And again, they're not necessarily, it's not about being negative, it's just about being aware. For instance, um, I think I became very aware that Americans tolerate more for the greater good than maybe anyone else in the rest of the world. It is almost like, okay, for the greater good, we'll put up with that for the greater good. It's actually there. So it is a reality. You come back, it takes a little bit of translating. So there's the culture gap, but the narrative gap, I stole this from Don Miller. And this may be one of the most helpful thoughts that I've tapped into. We all experience it to some extent. You go on holiday, and you come back from holiday, there's a narrative gap. Now, it's not that severe when you come back from holiday, but actually, there, having been at Bethel, and I remember just the 1 year that I did, in between being a student and being on the senior team. um, it was a machine. I mean, I was just in that machine. It just rolled every moment. I think it's like that for students, especially international students. Their whole life, obviously this last year not quite the same, but it's revival group, it's school, it's going to the lake, it's going to a conference, it's going to church, it's hanging out with friends, and everything is linked into that. And then all of a sudden there's a narrative gap. And knowing that there is a gap in the story. Now, here's what I think you have to do. And I think the prophetic has the potential to be the key answer. And that is, you've got to connect your story. You've got to find ways of, the best way I can say it is, you're throwing the rope across the river and you're sort of anchoring it on both sides of the river. You've got to have those kind of anchor points so that you're filling in this narrative gap, because it's real. And if you come back and you don't necessarily have the next job lined up, or you don't know what church you're going to go to, all of a sudden you've got nothing in your line of vision of what's going on. So there's this genuine gap in the story. And so what you can do as an individual is begin to fill that gap with the prophetic, with prophetic declaration, with hope, with dreams, so that you actually start to it's almost like building your own little bridge across, from both sides. And that's definitely been something that, we've certainly done a lot of, which links in, very much to, the beautiful letters at the bottom. For those that are smart will know that is, did you get what you came here for? And now, although this is my preaching and a title, and it's one of these days a journal that will be finished. It's a lot of notes that will eventually, not be a book, but more of a tool for people who go to conferences and school, etc., etc., which asks this question: did you get what you came here for? Because this helps to fill the narrative gap. So I would encourage you all to ask this question: what did you come for? See, if I go to medical school, it's obvious. I came to get trained to be a doctor, and I've either passed or failed, and I've either got a job or I haven't got a job. But what did you come for? What did you come here for? And I think it's really, really useful. And I would say 10 of my 15 points I repeat all the time. All the time. Did I get what I came here for? Did I learn to worship? Did I get that peace? Did I take care of my identity? Do I believe my story? Am I leaning on the prophetic? So I think this, although it was a message in my title, I think it has a lot of weight as a mentor to actually start dig into people's lives. So what did you come here for? And the funny thing with me is, to be honest, I've actually been. I'll tell you what I've been just studying recently in a moment because it relates to this. But there were times when I felt a fraud because I went for Sue. I didn't. Did I get what I came to Bethel? I didn't really go to Bethel. I went to Bethel for my wife, and ended up staying for 15 years and being on the team. Um, so my did I get what I came for? And if you don't know that title is Bill's fault, because somewhere around about 2003, if you're standing on the stage to the right hand side, he pinned me up against the wall on a ministry time one Sunday night and said, "Give him what he came here for." And I remember thinking, I don't think I know what I came here for, but I want what I came here for. So I think this is a really good question to ask, to dig in. What did you come here for? Did you get it? Um, and you know, my message is probably still floating around in the ether there somewhere. But I would really just be digging around. Did you get it? Did what were you here for? And so yeah, I would say at least 10 of my 15, if not all of them. And I've preached it a few times, but it's also, the fairly constant thoughts that I have in my head about, and obviously in a season like this, when I've not been able to get out there for over a year now, which is kind of crazy. It's actually the longest time that I've not been in Bethel for 22 years. So this is a little bit crazy. It's also the longest time that Sue and I have actually been together without me going away on for any reason in our entire married life. I've never slept, every night. So it's bizarre. I've been faithful. Let me just clarify that, but I've been doing other stuff. So so I would really encourage digging into this question, and there's um, yeah, and we can come back and chat around or ask questions. And then up the top there is new normal, and um, Bethel gives us a new normal, and it's a funny word really, because it's at one stage, I think the first time I talked about it, I talked about vanilla, and then I just kicked that out the way because it doesn't actually work for me. I really like vanilla ice cream, so it's kind of like vanilla's not boring, which is what people are trying to paint. And actually, normal. If you go to the doctor, you actually want your blood test to be normal. So normal is not boring. Normal is health. And I wish that it was, Melissa, it doesn't mean what I wish it meant. It should mean without sickness, normal, but it doesn't mean that. The etymology should be without sickness. It would be much easier, but it we got given a new normal, a new health at Bethel. And just to share a little piece of the story, for Sue and I, we have two churches on Sundays when we're not traveling. We go to the church our son and daughter go to nearby, and we're very good friends with the leaders, and they've brought me in, and I do a whole bunch of stuff. But it basically is our home. I don't do anything for money here at all. They'll sometimes give me a gift, but it's not that. It's their home Sunday morning church. It's not Bethel, but it's definitely hungry. But we've found ourselves in a life group, and we're in a life group because we want community. We're not in a life group necessarily to be taught. We're not expecting that. We're in a life group to have community. But we just recently did a particular course. I won't tell you the details of it, but it's so interesting because the course um, almost immediately began to step into self-help rather than supernatural. And Sue and I became so aware of the normal that is inside of us. We have, and it's not just throwaway phrases that are different. It's actually the very core of what we do, what we say, what we think, how we see. It absolutely is the very core. And it was really interesting because there were things coming up, and it's like Sue actually led one of the nights. She was asked to lead one of the nights on probably her least favorite subject, I would say. And and it was the best night of the whole course. And she just turned everything upside down, um, and shifted it away from self help to the presence and the supernatural. So I think it's worth just saying to people, though, you have been given a new normal. I wrote, and I didn't manage to fulfill this. I had all sorts of grand ideas coming back that I'd take a photograph a day of normal and things like that. But um, the classic for me is I have turned left on a red in England. Um, Now you can't turn left on a red, and obviously that comes from turning right on a red in America. But it had become so instinctive to me that it actually means that I was doing it driving on the left hand side of the road. I turned left on a red when I wasn't allowed to. Now, fortunately, I didn't cause an accident, but it was a good example to me of, and I took a photograph of a traffic light because I thought that would be a good thing to post. But um, the new normal is so deep, it's so entrenched in our, just it becomes cellular. And I think it's just worth talking that through. So all of that, I mean, those for me are some of the key points. Now, beyond that, um, there's lots of things that you'll be teaching, but um, one of the key things for me, and just going back to the narrative gap, is keeping the story alive. Is really encourage everyone, just keep this story alive. Now, Brad's been doing a fantastic job interning for me this year, and he knows that I can tell stories with dates, and I remember lots of key elements. Now, you either do or you don't. If you don't, you need to write them down. But keeping the story alive, I don't think I I don't think there's any better advice than saying, get that story and keep it alive. Don't let that narrative gap become a narrative full stop. Keep the story alive. Keep aware. Keep rehearsing. Now, for those of us who get paid to preach for a living, we tell our story a lot. But if you don't get paid to preach for a living, keep your story alive. I'll guarantee this, 100% guarantee this. If I'm having a bad day, which I don't particularly have very many of them, if I'm having a bad day, the best cure for my bad day is to be telling someone my story. Now, I know that seems like about me, but it's because my story reminds me of everything he's done, of how faithful he is. And so just getting people to tell their story, not their salvation testimony story, but their story, to be remembering the moments, the events, the encounters, the healings. If I do finally get around to a journal of did you get what you came here for, it will have in the back, when I've got a layout of it, I'll have in the back the prophetic words, the moment a song was sung that hit you, your favorite preach from Bill, Chris, whoever, while you were there. It's like, keep that story alive, because it will fade if you don't keep it alive. And so for me, that's a huge part. And I mean, there's not many of us on here, so I can just be a bit more chatty about it probably. But about 2 months ago, some of you know my friend Craig Muster from down in San Diego, and I wasn't I mean, I was doing perfectly well, and I was just like, but I was just kind of chatting to him. It's like, gosh, Bethel feels a long way away. It just felt, it's just like, gosh, it just feels a long way away right now, because of COVID and travel and being here and us not being able to jump on planes and travel and that sort of thing. And he just said something to me, and it was just a very interesting comment. He said, Paul, you had an identity before Bethel. And it wasn't, there was no judgment, there was no criticism. It was just this comment. It's like, Paul, you had some stuff going on before Bethel, don't forget it. It was the weirdest thing because um, 2 days later on a Facebook post, one of my ex-prisoners posted on my post. I'd never heard anything from this guy for all the time. So 20 years after I last saw him, a young black, well, he's not young, he'd be in his 40s now, black prisoner, posted on there about the impact I'd had on his life. And I'm ringing with this word from Craig. And I had a little exchange with him. He thanked me, and he said it was life changing. It was a life changing experience being in my prison, for goodness sake. The thing was, what it caused me to do was it caused me just to pay attention to that piece of the story. It almost as though I'd let that piece of the story fade, gone to Bethel, and I come back. And so keeping the story alive, just being conscious. My favorite chapter of any Bill book is, unusual circumstances, divine coincidences. The rest are really good, but I really love that chapter because that's the chapter that most helped me to hear more of God. I would say I hear God more with that thought that that's what he does, that's how he speaks. So yeah, keeping the story alive. And currently um i've had uh I've had a really curious experience, and may well, I mean, this would be what you guys will be, some of the basics, but there's absolutely no doubt about it. You've got to stay in the word. There's no question about that. You've got to stay in the word. You've got to stay in worship. You've got to stay in prayer. You've got to stay in community. There's no there is no option for those, and you can't afford to let the fact that the community won't be like Bethel. You can't afford to let the fact that you have a different normal to the community. You've got to get in community, get in the word, get in prayer, get in worship. End of discussion. No substitute. But so about it's probably 6 or 7 weeks ago, I got up and I was retracing a biblical journey that I'd had in Vienna, actually, at Awakening Europe. And I just got up and I thought, I just need to retrace that. I just need to remind myself of some things God said. And so I found myself reading Chronicles, which isn't my go-to choice necessarily. Probably is now because it's kind of jumping out at me. And I read, it says Benaiah. He said, Benaiah didn't become one of the three, but he was one of the mighty men. I am not kidding you. That jumped off the page at me because I didn't make the three at Bethel. I wasn't Bill, Chris, or Danny, or Bill, Chris, or Eric. No hard feelings. It was just I read it and it's like, oh my gosh, it's talking about me. He's still one of the mighty men. Benaiah is one of the mighty men, didn't attain to the three. And I'm using this as an illustration for keeping the story alive. And then if you read on, you realize that Benaiah is a key player in putting Solomon on the throne. In fact, Solomon may not have got on the throne if it wasn't for Benaiah. This is really crazy because I started to see this, just another piece of this bridge. I'm 4.5 years since I left Bethel. Keeping the story alive never goes away. It never goes away, and if you have eyes to see it, it's there. It's jumping off the page. It literally jumped off the page at me. And the funny thing then was that I carried on reading, and I got to, I think it's 13. It doesn't matter where it says, and David said, "Go and get the ark, because we didn't inquire of it since the days of Saul." Now, I'm not saying I hadn't inquired of it. I literally walked into the other room and said to Sue, I know what we're to do for the rest of our lives. We're to put the ark in the middle of every room we're in. And it all came from this: keep the story alive, keep the story alive, keep the story alive, and then jumps out of the page. And all of that to say, rightly or wrongly, because of this crazy season, where probably many of us have been more like isolated than we've ever been. I would say I've heard him speak more clearly, not in weird mystical ways, but jumping out of the book, slapping me in the face. So it's keep the story alive, keep the prophetic alive, has been absolutely crucial for us. So that's probably enough of me just talking. But so we got a new home, a new normal. Don't let the narrative gap get in the way, and check that people got what they came here for. And it really is all around culture. If we're not helping our students, which I know we are these days with Dan's book, etc., but understanding what this thing called culture really is, and how we can lead, steward, and manage culture when we leave, because they'll need to. I mean, we're doing that here in a number of places, even places that you would think are really doing well, helping them with culture. um, Absolutely vital to help people to understand. I'm talking to somebody at the moment, and I keep saying to him, you need an empowering culture. And he says, I know, we've got it, we've got this. It's like, no, you haven't. You've got a delegating culture. It's different. It's not an empowering culture. And so the culture that we all know and love at Bethel, we really have to help people when we leave actually understand it. They assume it's like this, what I call familiarity of language, but they don't have a familiarity of experience. And so helping people to do that is really vital. So anyway, let's open up and maybe have some Q&A, and or jump in on anything I've said. Or
I have a question, Paul. For mentors who have students who didn't get what they came here for, and if they're asking this with like a month left or something, do you have some wisdom on how to help pastor students through that?
I think I'd probably want to know what it was. That would certainly be my first thing. Now, you'll probably to some extent know one message that I carry that I think is really important. I'm not saying I invented it, but it is that piece about divine tension, and especially if it's around the prophetic, then definitely it would. What I'd be passing them is, you've got to keep the tension alive. Don't don't ever allow the tension to stop, especially if they didn't get what they came here for with regard to the prophetic fulfillment. Then they need to keep that alive. They need, I mean, Sue and I are currently walking in a, just a waiting for a prophetic word. We've all been there. And, the key is that we keep the prophetic alive. We keep the tension alive, and we keep reminding ourselves, that has not God not said. And then that is the key for pulling tomorrow into today, or pulling heaven to earth. The four key elements for me of tension are prophetic tension. The prophetic word hasn't come to pass. So what do? I keep the tension alive. I keep the awareness that what God has promised isn't what I'm experiencing today, but in that tension is energy, and I use energy to pull tomorrow into today, to declare, to believe, to pursue. I would also say with prophecy, I always try and encourage people to divide prophetic words in two. And I divide them into what can I do and what can only he do. And that gives me a check of, have I played my part? So my story with Mario Murillo, Paul, you're preaching stadiums. I can't do anything about that. I am not going to make it happen. I will do what I can do, but I'm not going to make that happen. So prophetic tension, the what I would call apostolic tension, the heaven on earth tension, the miracles tension. Again, you know, the message that I preached, that I think, no, it wasn't. It was the leader's advance when I stuck a chair in the middle of the stage, and I believe that Bethel is successful because there is what I call the spirit of an organization in the middle of everything we do. And that spirit is heaven on earth, but we surround it with principles. So it works really well for if for instance, they haven't seen the miracle in their life, or they haven't seen that miracle happen. What do? Do we throw the chair out and say that's rubbish? No, we don't. We surround it with principles, and the principles are by and large what Bill teaches us in Way of Life, but they are He's good, and so the chair is heaven on earth. That's what everything we do is pointed at that chair, heaven on earth. But He's good. And the illustration that we use, Sue and I use, because within the first year of us coming back, two of our students had a full-term stillbirth, and we walked into the room, and I've never heard tears like it, but I've also never heard the most beautiful worship ever, and that worship was, "But you're still good." And so in all of our disappointments, frustrations, He's good. I would say He's here. Is to remind people that no matter what, He's here. That nothing's impossible. It's not time bound. It's just nothing's impossible. And then what Bill, of course, adds, which is, we are significant, which we are. And then I always add in there, there are mysteries. There's stuff that we're not intended to understand. So I think that, I don't know whether there's another version of that message that anyone else has picked up, but for me, why does Bethel work? Because that chair in the middle of everything we do is so clear, it's heaven on earth. And there's nothing bigger than that. But when it doesn't happen the way we want it or expect it, we are able to surround that chair, as it were, with these simple truths. He's here. He's good. There are mysteries. We're an important part of this narrative, and nothing's impossible. And then, of course, for me, the way I describe it is the chair sits in a culture, and that culture enables stuff to grow. It enables us to see the more and the more and the more. So that's probably where I would go. Now, it would depend on exactly what it is. If something was unreasonable, that might be a tough conversation. But the did you get what you came here for me, was obviously my reflections of 15 years. And did I see everything that I could possibly have seen? Of course I didn't. But the beautiful thing about our culture, and it's Jesus's culture, is greater works. Greater works than these shall you do. That's what Jesus said to the boys. Greater works than these shall you do. So there's always more beyond Bethel.
I think that's super helpful. Thank you. Does anybody else have questions for Paul?
I'll jump in. Paul, I'm a little wrecked by one of the last phrases that you made, that the culture of empowerment, that there's a differentiation between culture of empowerment and culture of delegation. It's like, oh, mind blown there. Can you talk about that a little bit? And now we're maybe diverging a little bit from our intended topic here, but I would love for you to just take a moment and talk to mentors about what that would look like in the mentor protege relationship, between how mentors can can do more than just delegate and really empower?
It all starts really with that delegation is still from me to you, but empowering is giving you an environment in which you can fully express yourself. So the key place where this all starts is that um, it's it's not unlike it's related to submission as well, because you know I actually think that empowerment is probably one of the biggest keys to Bethel's success. And so, you have, the story that you've probably heard me or seen me do is, I show up at Bethel and I put my bags down at Bill's door, figuratively speaking, and say, there's my bags. Give me yours. I'll carry yours. Where are you going? And Bill goes, no, let me give you your bags back. And, but let me put my name on them. So because you can go further, higher, wider, and deeper with my name on your bags. And for me, that is the model of submission, and it's the model of empowering. So here's a few thoughts. A delegate is relieving the leader doing less important tasks. Now, it's not totally true, but there's an element of that. It's like a delegate is given limited power and authority. So a delegate is whereas we'll come to the empowered in a minute. A delegate has to keep checking how they are doing by performance. A delegate draws to themselves, deriving importance from their title. I'm the vice president. I'm a delegated but I can never somehow rise above the person that I am representing. A delegate is driven to copy, not enhance, and failure to imitate feels like failure. Whereas the empowered is representing in places, expressions, and gifts where the empowerer cannot go or express themselves. The empowered are given. So Jesus empowered us. You can't empower someone unless you have power to give away. So it's. I'm not saying that delegation's always wrong. I'm saying there's a place for delegation. In actual fact, there's probably a journey of delegation that leads to trusted empowerment. But if the goal is delegation, it won't, the upturned pyramid that certainly I teach is that if the organization is that way round, you're empowered to go further, wider, higher, deeper than I have ever gone. So I empower people to go further. Whereas if I delegate, I'm not. I'm delegating that way round, but I'm empowering that way round. A delegate is unlimited in power and authority to serve, bring increase and expansion to the original vision and purpose. Now that's where the chair comes in, though, because that's why Bethel succeeds, is because the heaven on earth is so clear, so undiluted. Now we're all empowered to serve the chair. So we've been given the focus. So you can get a Chris Overstreet who walks in and says, I want to start a bar ministry. And Bill says, I never had an interest in a bar ministry, but I had an interest in a Chris Overstreet. And as soon as I knew that Chris Overstreet was willing to carry my bags, I gave him his bags back. And I empowered him to go further, wider, higher, deeper, longer than I've ever gone. So there's a difference, a distinction between the two. Let me find a couple of others. They're empowered to be the best them that they can be, not the best representative that they can be, but the best reproducer that they can be. And the kingdom is reproduction. The kingdom isn't it, it we do represent, obviously we represent Jesus, which is extraordinary, but we're about reproducing, we're about multiplication. The delegate doesn't tend to multiply in the same way. The empowered check their heart condition to stay calibrated, whereas the delegate is is checking how they're doing by performance. The empowered is checking their heart condition. So if I know that my heart is right with the house or with Bill or with Chris, then my performance will be uh, increased because of that. So I don't have to check my performance, I check my heart. If my heart's right, I'll succeed. Um, the empowered serve a purpose greater than their own. The empowered are drawn to be originals, adding to the whole, not diluting it. So empowerment is allowing employees to act on their own behalf, and delegation is giving enough lead for them to act on your behalf as their manager. Kingdom empowerment leans on covenant and relationship grown from hearts of love, honor, trust, and integrity. So those are my scribbled notes that you could probably produce a preaching series out of. But they're, you know, it really is one of the reasons why, you know, an apostolic house sends. It sends people to be greater than the original. It's the nature of the apostolic. So Jesus said, as the Father sent me, so I send you. And he also said, greater works than these shall you do. So he was never intimidated by us being more successful than him. Obviously, we can't be. But actually, what I believe the most important thing that Jesus said about that wasn't that we would do greater works, but that we would live in a culture that always believed there was more, that always knew there was more. So yeah, that's where that came from.
Yeah, I mean, a teaching series or a mentor training series. I think that's what I'm hearing, Paul, is a whole series on how to raise up mentors there. That was fantastic. Yeah,
Thanks.
never heard that before. Like seriously, mind blown. It's as if delegation has a terminus. There's an end to it,
Yeah.
but empowerment has no end. So yeah, well done.
I think there are a few themes that overlap. I don't know that I've ever put them all on the same page. I would say excellence and performance. They're in the same family as success and succession. Which for me, the whole thing with success, I personally think that succession is not biblical. I believe that success is the biblical model of government is Jacob and Jesus, and they reproduced, they didn't replace. So when we're trying to replace, we might actually be trying to do something that is ultimately not possible. What we need to do is to reproduce the success. And you know, performance and excellence, success and succession, delegation and empowerment. And in, you know, to empower, you have to have something to give away. And if you're not genuinely giving power away to somebody, then you will end up limiting and controlling them. So I, Paul, send you Timothy to remind them of my works in Christ. I mean, that's empowering. That made Carl happy anyway. He seems
It was absolutely brilliant. Thanks, Paul, just for just explaining the difference between those two and how to move from one to the other. But I like too how you said sometimes you start off delegating in order to move toward empowerment because you need to get to know your people. And, you know, I think that's helpful for mentors to know, like, yes, it's still okay to see what you can entrust them with and then grow it from there into true empowerment. And yeah, I think that was really helpful. Thanks for sharing that.
And it's heart. We're back to heart condition. So and it's about trust. It's so interesting as well with culture because so 2004, the senior team at Bethel sat with a whiteboard and we did this exercise of who do you manage and what do you manage, and it was the birth of dividing up the tasks for the whole team. And I was a part of that. I think I probably suggested the model. I've given that away to a lot of people as an exercise. It's part of strategic planning. It's part of what I do. And the whole idea is just kind of sort of to multiply and be more efficient. I just recently gave it to a church that have a delegate model and a control model, which I didn't realize they had so badly. Gave them exactly the same exercise that I've given to dozens of people, and they came back with this thing of what percentage of each individual's time was going to be spent on what task. And I said, that's crazy. That's so controlling. Where did you get that from? It's like, they only did what you told them. It's like, they didn't. It was such a delegate culture, and not necessarily an unhealthy level of control, but the leaders had been controlled by their leaders, and they were creating control beneath them. It's so fascinating. But so to me, the key in the apostolic, the key is that we recruit sons and daughters, and we empower sons and daughters to go further, higher, wider, and deeper than we have ever gone. And when we're secure in our identity, that's easy. But when we're not secure in our identity, we control. Wimber had a delegation scale, which was a kind of a journey towards empowerment. And it was give me a report on the problem and I'll take action, study the problem and make a recommendation, analyze the situation, propose a course of action that you will take, but wait for my approval, analyze the situation, describe your proposed plan of action and follow through unless I say no, take action and tell me what you did, take care of the situation, no need to report back to me. It's actually it's a brilliant kind of scale. And I think it's a little bit like just building trust with somebody. But if you did that in a controlling culture, it wouldn't work. You have to do it in a culture that is fundamentally empowering, and it's the beauty of it. It's what Danny's given us. It's that piece of the culture that he's given us. So, yeah.
Hey, Paul, I have a question. Um, at least in my experience over the last couple years, especially with third year students, there ends up being I don't know if fear is the right word, but almost like concern that when they leave, especially the European students, when they leave to go back home, that they won't be able to cultivate their relationship with God in the same way that they have experienced here, or they may not be able to do outreach with the same sort of zeal than whatever that is. And so I know you've been back in the UK for some time now. What could be something, and it's not just for European students, it could be for anybody, but what would, I guess, some advice on what could be helpful in being able to send them out in a way where they can be confident that they can thrive outside of this environment in their personal relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't a substitute for the basics. I mean, that's why in it's an interesting thing. Let me try and give a little parallel. I think it's like the discipleship issue. Now, let me just explain that a minute. Everyone, it seems to me, everywhere I go at the moment, people are talking about discipleship. Seem to have loads of people coming up. It's like, yeah, I get it. We've got to disciple people, but not disciple people to be good church going Christians. We've got to disciple people to be kingdom minded believers. And now, but the kingdom-minded discipleship must keep the basics in there. It has to keep those. So what are the basics for a student leaving Bethel? I think the basics are be in the presence, be in community, be in the Bible, be in prayer. There isn't a substitute. There is no substitute. I think what happens, and I kind of understand this, but it's funny because I think it was Melissa's comment was, what happens if somebody in the last month doesn't, is saying they didn't get what they came here for. For some reason, there is a group of people who don't think about leaving until the last month. I mean, I would get Brits come up to me in the last month and go, "Can I meet with you? Can you whiteboard coach me?" It's like, I've had a home group in my house for Brits. You could have come to that for 3 years. You were very welcome. It's like, and they would say things to me like, "Well, didn't have anything to do with other Brits. Didn't, because I wasn't planning on going back," and those kind of things. So for some reason, people do suddenly jump out of in that way. So I think from the mentor point of view, the third year point of view, it's like you got to get started on this at the beginning of the third year, and start helping them. Very years ago when I used to do the third year interviews, which seems forever ago, I would always say, only do a third year that will help you with where you're going. That has to be the basic piece. If that internship isn't going to help you to get to where you're going, it probably isn't the right internship. So it starts there. But it also, the beginning of third year needs to be helping people to work out where they're going, what they're going to be doing, and how they're going to walk out this Christian life. I mean, if I'd been there and taught the third year in my current, what's currently happening in my life, which is what I've never really taught without talking about what's happening to me. It is that 6 weeks ago, I picked up the Bible and it slapped me in the face as clear as a word of God has ever slapped me in the face. And, he's not going to stop talking, as long as we know how to do the basics. So I think that would definitely be where I'm going now. The Europeans, we've been doing, we're now doing twice a month. We were doing every week during the first part of the pandemic, BSSM webinars. We do a community night every 2 weeks on Zoom, and we have a speaker every 4 weeks, so to speak, and just really encourage them, connect up with people from where you've come from and where you're going back to. Because I've known people who had nothing to do with Brits for 3 years in the school, and it's like, no, connect with the people. One of the strongest alumni groups ever in Bethel is the Germans. Why? Because they connect all the time. They're meeting all the time. Alex Rao's done a phenomenal job of just keeping them connected. So it's the thing about keeping the story alive. Stay connected to where you've come from and keep the story alive. I think it's also, it's a part of Bethel that I love, but we don't always talk about the hard stuff. We don't. Leaving Bethel's hard. And for me, I'm 15 years on the senior team, and it's a hard place to leave. It just is. It's the most extraordinary environment. Every corner you turn, there's somebody slapping you on the back, telling you that was a great word, encouraging you, and there's some tough stuff out here. In the last year, I mean, literally a year ago this weekend, I was asked to solve a particular problem in a ministry, and I went away from that request and conversation I had with the board of that ministry. They asked me to do something. I spent pretty much a day in prayer, and God gave me 2 questions. And I asked that ministry those 2 questions and watched the ministry blow up, because the answers to the 2 questions were unacceptable. And, it was something that I was investing a lot of me in, a lot of my future in, and I just watched it, and it's tough, and so I think it's worth talking about the tough stuff. It just is. I'm currently coaching two churches where the senior leaders had a moral fall, and the senior leader is now more, and I'm trying to rebuild the team. There's tough stuff out there, there really is raw, tough stuff. So I think we do need to help people to see, you got something very special in Bethel. It's absolutely unique. It's incredibly amazing. You might not meet it, I ever again, so I think it's worth. And so then that's, well, okay, so how do you survive that? Well, strengthen yourself in the Lord, keep reminding yourself, the prophetic, what's God said, the testimonies, what's God already done. It's so it's almost like we need to actually pull on what we learn and apply them in tougher situations than where we learned them, if that makes sense. January the 24th, 2008, I sat in a hotel room in Fresno, California with a bad diagnosis, on my own, on a trip, traveled on my own. And I sat on a bed and I uttered the immortal words, what would Bill Johnson do? Not what would Jesus do, but what would Bill do? And I remember, his simple instruction, beautiful message, but sometimes you have to apply it. Read the Psalms until you find your voice. And I sat cross-legged on that bed and I read the Psalms, and I was willing to stay there all night if I had to. And I read the Psalms and I found my voice. And I remember sitting there and thinking, what that guy teaches actually works. It actually worked in this moment. So I think we need to try and help people to go, what are you going to do when tough stuff happens? What are you going to do when you are betrayed? And I think even learning from some of, I hate to put it this way, but learning from some of the people that have failed since they left, not being afraid maybe to have conversations. What, some of the ones that have gone, somebody that kind of interned for me, who's now deconstruction, is proudly has a Facebook page with videos about how to tell your parents you've deconstructed your faith. How did that happen? How did that person get there? Good to actually have some hard conversations, I think, about that tough stuff. If that's not too, I think it's just being real. What about, some people who've, gone off into gay lifestyles, transgender lifestyles and stuff like that. How did that happen? What happened? How did two leaders that I know that have both, I've sat next to them in Bethel. How did they end up having moral falls? What happened there? Those kind of, I know it wasn't what you asked, but those kind of things,
No, it's so good. Thank you for sharing.
I have a question. Do you think, I love the thing about the narrative gap, or no, telling your, remembering your story. Do you think that we should be doing that the whole 3 years? Do you know what I mean? Like not forgetting who we were before? Because some of that doesn't have to be thrown out. I don't know. I'm asking,
I mean, none of it's, well, there's some guy I know that says, he wastes nothing, he gets you ready. I can't think who he is, but
Yeah.
I mean, I don't just believe it. It's my life. I mean, I had a phone call. 10 days ago. Somebody said to me, "Would you become?" Now I'm avoiding boards. I don't. I actually said to Sue, "I'm not going to do another board. Definitely not another church board." But this guy calls me and he says, I'm the chairman of a board of trustees, and we are providing housing for the mentally ill, military who've had PTSD, and ex-prisoners. And we would like a believing ex-prison governor. And I'm like, I kind of quite like that title, retired prison governor. I think I'll use that. And it's like, I haven't actually told him yet the answer, but I think we do need to help people. When I think about, some of the timeline stuff, if you study timeline stuff, there's always the pre-sovereign experiences. And the reality is our pre-sovereign experiences aren't wasted. They're incredibly valuable, our pre-encounter experiences. So yeah, I think, one of the things that, evangelists, the crazy evangelists, there's two things about evangelists. They know they're radically saved and they believe their story. And they think that everyone else should be radically saved and have their version of their story. I mean, they just absolutely, so you get around them and it's like, that's who they are. Well, we should all be that, which should be the result of us. So here's one of the things. I'm currently in this little journey of studying Saul and Paul, who were both called Saul, who give the same speech. They're both from tribe of Benjamin, the little tribe. And one wastes the most extraordinary opportunity and one doesn't. What's the difference, And somewhere in there is believing their story. And, even there's this little bit that I'm playing around with trying to understand the imposter syndrome thing, which is definitely all in there, So, yeah, I think we should. I think it's kind of, I'm not a journaler, but I scribble in a lot of moleskins, they're not really journals, but I do think that we need to help people to absolutely believe their story, their unique story, and we are a storytelling generation. We're constantly talking about the narrative, and so I think so. I think helping people to do that, it honestly, I think it gets me through everything, because I can reflect back. I can go, oh, God did that, or I just, diagnosed with prostate cancer. Sue and I walking around a trail night after night. He's never let us down before, and he's not about to start now. And we looked at each other and said, he healed us of this. Remember when we saw that? Remember when we did that? And it's my story, and it's my story. And the problem is, what we've got is a culture, and whatever language you want to put on it, there is a lot of celebrity culture in our Christian world, which isn't all bad. But the problem with it is that it's easier for me to believe your story than it is to believe mine. And when I say believe, there's an incredible message, and I've got to find the original of it. But this is what it means to me. It says in somewhere in Genesis, Jacob leaned on his staff. And when Jacob leaned on his staff, you're like this, Pam, is the rod of his testimonies, because Jacob's staff would have been marked with all the events of his life. So that's how they did it in those days. They would mark it. That was that event. So when he leaned on his staff, what he was doing was he's saying, I can trust my staff. I can trust my story. So when I say, do I believe my story? It's not, do I believe it's true? It's, can I trust it? Can I lean on it? Can I put all my weight on it? And even when we're thinking about, we know that we were to come back to live here. No regrets. Is it easy? No. Any regrets? No regrets. Absolutely. What are we doing being here? We are leaning on our staff. We're trusting our story. So if people don't get that, it's strengthen yourself in the Lord. It's everything we know. It's all of that. But I think maybe shifting it to being personal, making it the personal. Do I believe my story? Can I trust my story?
Yeah. Paul, this has been absolutely brilliant, of course, as always. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if before, as we're closing things up, if you wouldn't mind just praying, and as Carl said, we'll send this out to all the mentors. So if you don't mind just praying, not over just those of us on the call, but over all of our mentors for wisdom as we help launch our students out. I would really appreciate that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Father, I just thank you for our family, our Bethel family, and those that are still there and those that have gone off and done great things, and even those that have gone off and wandered off. Father, I love our family. And Father, I just ask right now that there would be a release of deep, deep wisdom and understanding of what our students need to be successful, and permission for everyone to find and define what their own success will look like in their life. And so, Father, I just ask for that. I pray that as we've talked about believing our story, trusting our story, that first and foremost, every mentor that listens to this will be able to, as it were, lean on their staff, to lean on their testimony, on their story, and to know that you have never let them down. You've always been faithful. You've always come through. And even when we had to wait long periods of time for the breakthrough, that we can lean on our staff. Father, maybe that illustration as we come to the end of this school year, that it will not be so much that the mentors teach something, but they demonstrate something, that they model leaning on your staff. And Father, as we send students back all around the world in this unusual season, Father, I pray that there would also be a modeling of how to truly keep that which we learned, as it were, in the center of everything we do. So, Father, I ask that in these last few weeks of school, that, as it were, the modern day New Testament version of the Ark of the Covenant would be present in every meeting, whether it's one-on-one or 1,000 in the room, that the awareness of your presence, the awareness of your provision, the awareness of your power, and the awareness of your principles represented by the ark. Father, give us the wisdom and the courage to put the ark of the covenant in the middle of every room, every conversation. And Father, I pray, perhaps as an illustration, that every student will take the ark with them, that they'll take the ark back to where they came from, and they'll know that it represents your presence, that Aaron's rod represents your power, that the jar of manna represents your provision, and the 2 tablets represent your principles. Father, would you give every one of us the wisdom to send every student home with the ark of the covenant, the ark of the promises of what you've said you will do, and the ark of the testimony, the declaration of what you've already done. Father, I pray for that. Pray for it. And I pray that this transition, in this end of this unusual season, will be filled with unusual hope, with unusual expectation. And as I think of this post-pandemic season, that in my mind, it's like a new kingdom, a new season of the kingdom. And Father, I pray that every one of us will find our place to put the king on the throne. Just as Solomon took the throne after David, I ask that you will give every one of us the wisdom to make sure that there is no alternative on the throne of our lives, that we will represent you, Jesus, in everything we do, for the honor of your name. Amen.
Wow, thank you so much, Paul. So much wisdom that you just shared with us today. Thank you for your
Thanks.
time.
It's been fun to be with you.
Yeah, it's been great. Paul, one quick thing. I kept seeing the story of Jonathan and his armor bearer for you from, I think it's First Samuel 14, and just really saw the Lord surrounding you with armor bearers, not just one, but like a team of armor bearers that say, "Go do all that is within your heart. I am with you, heart and soul." So, yeah. So
I'll
we
take
say
it.
yes and amen to that, Lord.
That's where I'm reading at the moment. I'm all over those chapters at the moment. There's a key there for us. I'm pretty certain of it. And I know it's weird, this thought of the kingdom, but it almost feels like there's a new expression of kingdom post-pandemic. So I think it's all in that story. It's all there. So I'll take it. Yeah. I'm good with a few dozen armor bearers.
Wonderful.
All right, well, take
All
care.
right.
Great to
Bless
see
you,
you all.
Paul. Bye,
Wonderful. Okay.
everybody.